Hello and welcome back everyone to this second video in the series of free video trainings. I'm going to call them masterclasses now. That first one ended up being way longer than I meant for it to be, but I hope you got a ton of value from it. And so today I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the things I teased in the first video, um, specifically about funding, as well as how to actually reach out to potential supervisors. But first, let me just start by saying thank you. The feedback I've been receiving has been overwhelming. It is so nice to know that I am helping you guys out there. So thank you for all the comments, the DMs, the questions. Please keep them coming. I am here to try to make this application process so much easier for you than it was for me. So thank you for watching that last video, and I'm so glad that it helped you. A quick recap, just so everyone's up to speed, no matter where you are. Um, First, we covered in the last video finding the driver behind your application. We went through that kind of weird exercise, um, but you pulled through it with me on thinking about when you're at your funeral in 50, 60, 70 years down the line. What are the people in your life saying about you? What's the impact that you had? And identifying that is going to help you identify the why that you bring through behind your application. And it's important that you keep that top of mind for everything that you put into your application, whether it's these materials you're writing right now or when you get that interview invite in December or January. We also went over more practically choosing the right universities to maximize your chances of acceptance. So, things like applying to both Oxford and Cambridge, as long as you find programs that are a good fit at both, is essentially doubling your chances at success for Oxbridge, as well as doubling your chances of success for winning scholarships from both of these universities. And making sure ultimately, however, that the program you're choosing, the school you're choosing it because it's the right fit for you, not because of the name. I also talked about the timeline you should take with all of these different tasks you need to cover for your application. We went through all the way from September or October through December or January, and the timeline that you need to make sure you're following to make sure you get everything done on time and get that application in on time. And finally, we went over how to choose the right supervisor and why this is important. They're going to be shaping your entire graduate experience once you are at Oxford and Cambridge, and it's important to choose the one that's truly the right fit for you, not just because they have a flashy name or triple digit H index, but I also provided some tips for being more likely to get accepted or at least get that stamp of approval from a supervisor by doing things like choosing associate professors over tenured professors who might have fewer people working with them and fewer students vying to work with them in the application cycle. But they've also got more time to mentor you, which is super important once you are a graduate student, trust me. And then finally, we address some common questions. So things like, you know, that's great, Claire, that you have a personal tragedy that drove your application. Again, I know you weren't saying that it was great, but you get what I mean. What about me? And so I talked about the importance again of that why for your application. It doesn't need to be based on a personal tragedy, but you need to know why you're passionate about your subject, why you want to study it. I've got plenty of friends here at Oxford who did not base their applications on a personal tragedy, and they all got here too. So you don't need to worry about having something like that to grab admissions committee's attention. Another concern can be about time limitations. You're going to want to apply to at least 8 to 15 different programs to really maximize your chances of success here, and that can be time consuming, but we went over how with a few of the right systems in place, using things like time blocking, getting up an hour earlier to work on your applications, really committing to that process. This is doable even if you're very busy as a full-time student, or you were like me and you had a very demanding full-time job. And then finally, we went a little bit over the potential emotional toll of this process, even if you have success. And that's a very legitimate concern. So it's very important going into this process that you're aware of that, but you're also building up mental and emotional resilience, having a support system, taking care of yourself. And we talked about all of these things for maximizing your chances of success. And also, we talked about who I am. So I don't need to go over that in detail again, but again, for whoever's maybe joining us newly here, I'm Claire. I'm a third year DPhil student studying clinical neurosciences at Oxford with a fully funded Clarendon scholarship. I also won a fully funded doctoral training partnership PhD at Cambridge. This was back in the 2020-2021 application cycle, the most competitive application cycle in history coming off the COVID-19 pandemic. However, it wasn't always that way. In fact, 3 years prior, I had applied to 10 PhD programs and I got rejected to every single one without a single interview. And the reason that I am here, I also went over, is because my twin sister that you see pictured down here was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune neurological disease that made her paralyzed for a time. And luckily, she recovered, but not everyone's so lucky. So that's what I'm researching here at Oxford. That's why I do what I do. But what I really want to bring home here for you again is that transformation that I made from rejections to not one success, but two major successes, not just acceptances, but full funding, is that everything changed for me when I could finally learn from people who came before me. I did not know anyone in the space who had gotten into a place like Oxford or Cambridge the first time I applied. I was taking advice from people who meant well, hadn't tried to get into Oxford or Cambridge as a master's or PhD student at that time. So everything changed for me when I could finally get in contact with people, know people that had gotten into top institutions for PhDs. But even for me, I was going off of somebody I was lucky enough to work with who had just gotten into PhD programs, but they were in the US. They were top institutions, but they were in the US. So I didn't even have access to somebody trying to do exactly what I wanted to at Oxford and Cambridge. So even I was guessing a little bit. So this is really special. And that's why I wanted to make this opportunity for you with these video trainings so that you can learn from somebody who has just done this process, something I didn't have access to, but I wish I had. And I believe this should be way more accessible to people. So I want to get into a few of the things that I promised at the end of the last video training, and these things that are really real concerns. Let's start with finding funding. If you are thinking about this now, if you're concerned about it now, this might sound silly or funny to you, but this is a good thing actually. You are way ahead of the curve if you're thinking about funding now. This is a mistake I actually made in my own application process to Oxford and Cambridge. I wasn't thinking about funding at all. More so thought I could just push this off and figure it out later. Let's worry about the interviews and the acceptances first. But I'm telling you that you definitely need to be thinking about this now. So I want to provide a few practical tips that you can start working on finding funding right away, because you should be thinking about this. Like I said in the last video, you should be thinking about this throughout these months that you're working on your application. So the first thing to know is that at Oxford and Cambridge for postgraduate programs, you are automatically considered for most internal scholarships. This is going to be true at both schools. At Oxford, there is not an additional essay or package of the application you need to put together to be considered for most internal scholarships. However, at Cambridge, there is the Cambridge Trust, which is an additional statement, personal statement that you need to write. You need to look through the list of scholarships offered through the Cambridge Trust, which Cambridge has linked on their website. And if you find any that are applicable to you, you need to write an additional personal statement. But once you do that, it's applicable for all applications you're making through Cambridge. So for me, I applied to 3 different PhD programs at Cambridge, and I could use the same statement for each one through their application portal for being considered for all scholarships through the Cambridge Trust. Of course, you're going to want to look on the web pages for scholarships and funding that both Oxford and Cambridge have. They're going to have a huge list of scholarships available, not just internally, but also potential external sources. And if you find any that are applicable for you, it is important that you look at the individual requirements, because there may be additional steps you need to take. But for the grand majority, you will automatically be considered. So for example, the scholarship that I have, which is actually in conjunction between the Clarendon Fund and my college, I was automatically considered for that. The second thing to know, which I alluded to earlier, is that you need to apply early. The best scholarships that are available that are going to fully fund you, the most prestigious, if you will, also They're all due this autumn. So Gates Cambridge is going to be due this autumn. Rhodes Scholar applications are already going to be due this autumn, as well as many others. So be looking early. You can do this through Google searches. I'll also get into a few other places that you can look here, which includes charities, nonprofits, and professional organizations. These are a little bit harder to find, but that's actually an advantage for you because if you're willing to dig deep and look hard, most people aren't. So you're going to have a competitive advantage if you dig for these. These are things I had to look for in March of my application process when I was initially told I did not win internal funding rounds. So I freaked out and I spent an entire month. No one saw me, not even my housemates. I just slept, went to work, looked for scholarships, and repeated that process. So you definitely don't want to find yourself with an acceptance and then totally stressed out because you're not sure you're going to be able to make it work. That's why you want to look for scholarships early. But charities, nonprofits, and these professional organizations are really great places to start looking. So for nonprofits, that can be something like Rotary International. If you've ever heard of that before, they actually do offer scholarships in a select few areas for people to pursue graduate degrees. So definitely look into Rotary International and your local chapter. For professional organizations, this is going to be, for example, like the Pathological Society of Great Britain, Ireland, or the International Political Science Association. These professional organizations that often put on conferences in your field of study, they also offer sometimes fully funded graduate scholarships. So look into those as well. And then finally, there are specific colleges at both Oxford and Cambridge that will offer full scholarships for graduate programs. These are usually extremely subject specific, but you're definitely going to want to check those out on Oxford and Cambridge's scholarship pages. They should list those, and that would be a reason that you would apply or list a specific college on your application. This is something I haven't mentioned before and was a huge question when I applied is which scholarship or which college should I be listing when I apply, and does it matter? And the answer is not really. For undergraduates, the college system is very important because that is where you have all of your classes or your tutorials. That's really the center of your university life is actually at your college. And even understanding what a college is can be kind of difficult. It I don't like to relate it to this, but it is basically you could think of it in very simplistic terms as a Harry Potter house. So whether or not you live in college your first year as a graduate student, it is where all of your social life is based. If you're going to be dining at a dining hall or in college, as we would say, that's going to be at your college. And resources that are available for you, but especially your social life, like clubs and organizations that you join, are going to often be through college. So, for some people, that's very important to them. For some people, it's not very important that it's very lively or people are very involved. So you can kind of look into the reputations of different colleges for these sorts of things if you want to, if you're really interested in it. Otherwise, like almost everyone that I know is happy with the college they got allocated to if they didn't choose one. But there are certain times, for example, you're interested in a scholarship offered by a certain college, that would be a time that you would want to list that college as your first choice. But even then, if you pick a different college and that college says, yes, we want to take you, you can still, when you're being considered for internal funding, you can have a different college say, hey, we want to give that person a scholarship, and then you would get reallocated to them. So it's not like a different college with an applicable scholarship is not going to give it to you and not consider you just because you listed someone else. For example, my college, I had, to be honest, even though they're one of the oldest at Oxford, I had never heard of them until they were like, hey, we want to give you some money. And I was like, yeah, cool. Sounds good. So don't worry about that. Don't worry about choosing colleges so much. And reputations that you hear about online are really a lot more applicable to undergraduates than anything. So I would encourage you to just like keep an open mind and don't stress about that too much. The next thing I want to talk about, which I know is a huge point of anxiety and concern with a lot of you, and it certainly was for me when I applied, is how to actually reach out to those potential supervisors after you have chosen them, which we spoke about in the last video. And this stressed me out so much that I didn't even do it the first time I applied. And again, I talked about in the last video how important it is that you do reach out to supervisors if you're doing a research-based program. So of course, this is going to be PhDs, but also people who are choosing a master's degree with a significant research component. That's not just rotations, but a master's by research, for example, or maybe an MSc who has a full year of research that you would pick a supervisor for. You have to, basically, if you want to get accepted to Oxford and Cambridge, you need to reach out to a supervisor ahead of time, have a conversation with them. So how do you do that? That was a huge question mark for me. I had no idea, and I was lucky to be able to kind of speak to some people at this point I had known who were postdocs at more prestigious institutions in the United States that I had the privilege of having contact with. But it's still like these people hadn't done what I was trying to do for their PhDs. So still kind of a guessing game. So I want to clear that up for you today. So when you reach out to a potential supervisor, the first thing you're going to want to do is clearly introduce yourself, say who you are, and state your interest in their research field. You want to start more general about that, and then through your email, you get a little bit more specific. But tell them you've been following your research, that you're interested in their field. Next, mention a specific recently published paper of theirs that you found interesting. This is going to show that you have done your homework. You've read a paper. It takes so much work to publish a paper if you've ever published a paper. So, that's going to stroke their ego a little bit too, and make them feel good. You read their paper. You found it interesting. I mean, I don't have people emailing me telling me that they found my papers interesting. So that's a great thing to do, but also relevant to the research that you ultimately want to discuss with them, that you want to do for your own graduate degree. So that's why it's going to be important. I think I mentioned in the last video about when you are choosing your supervisor, you want to be reading 1 to 2 recently published research papers from them, because this is where that comes in and where you mention it. Next, be direct with them. Obviously, you're being respectful when you do this, but you're also, by being direct, if that makes you a little uncomfortable, it's respectful in its own way, because you're being respectful of their time. They don't have time to read you beating around the bush and waxing poetic about how fascinating you find everything. They don't have time for that. They're very busy people. So just be direct and ask them if they'd be willing to supervise you for the program that you're applying for. Finally, attach your CV for their reference. They're going to want to look at that to kind of get a snapshot of you and your potential to be able to do research, and ask to have a meeting with them to discuss further. It is as simple as that. That's what you do. You send out that email, and hopefully you get lots of responses. So I hope that's been very helpful, these two very real, very practical concerns for this application process that I had no idea how to approach. I hope that helps you a lot. But again, going through this, you might be wondering, saying, I didn't attend an Ivy League for my bachelor's degree. How am I supposed to get into Oxford and Cambridge? Well, I can tell you that neither did I. I did not go to an Ivy League for my undergraduate. I started a master's degree that I was doing online. I did not even complete that before I came to Oxford because it was not necessary, but that wasn't at an Ivy League either. So it's more about how well you did at your previous institutions and what you did with your degree after that than where you went to school. So if you didn't go to an Ivy League before, don't worry. That doesn't mean that you can't get into Oxford and Cambridge. I am living proof of that. The next thing, you might be saying, I'm an international student. I heard it's way more competitive as an international student. How do I get into Oxford and Cambridge? As you can probably hear in my voice, so am I. I am not from the UK. And the important thing to know here for a postgraduate, at least at Oxford and Cambridge, is that admissions is not necessarily more competitive for international versus home students. If there is something to factor in here, they will usually state on the program's page how many spots they have for international versus home students. This is going to be mostly applicable to, for example, fully funded programs that are funded by the Wellcome Trust. These are quite competitive, and they often can only allocate 1 or 2 spaces to international students. So this is why I say some scholarship opportunities are more competitive for international students. Unfortunately, especially since Brexit, there are a lot of government scholarships through the UK, for example, through the National Institutes of Health and Research or the other sort of funding bodies in different disciplines. A lot of their graduate scholarships are not even available to international students. So make sure to look into those, but don't keep your hopes up that that's necessarily available to international students. Do keep that in mind. But as far as basic admissions, it's not going to be more competitive for international students than home students. And don't think because you're an international student that you can't get a scholarship, because I was able to. And most of the people I know at Oxford who have full graduate scholarships are not from the UK. You might also be saying, I don't know anyone with connections to Oxbridge. I feel like an outsider. And I can tell you 110% that I also felt this way when I was applying. It was super intimidating. I didn't know anybody in this world. Oxford and Cambridge sounded impressive out there, but I didn't have any connections. I didn't know what I was doing. I felt like a complete and total outsider. And I can tell you from being here, at least at Oxford now for 2 full years, I have been so struck the moment that I was here by how down to earth most people are and how approachable they are, from your fellow students to your supervisors, super tenured professors. I've had just the most excellent experience with that, which was certainly a contrast for me to US academia. And so I want to say that there is a place for you here, and you do belong here. If you know the value of hard work, you're intellectually curious and passionate about your subject, and you pursue your success relentlessly. So you want to think about this application, the outcome that you want to have. You have to identify what that is and pursue it relentlessly. And yes, that may mean you have to try more than once, like I did. You might not get it on the first try. But if you pursue that relentlessly, I always believe, and I've always experienced in my own life, that you will end up where you need to be. But you do belong here, even if you feel like an outsider, I promise.